guys, and welcome back to my channel for another Mystery Monday video. As always, these videos are not intended for children under the age of 14, and due to the nature of true crime, viewer discretion is advised. The Gabby Petito case is huge national news right now as police have been looking for a 22-year-old woman who went missing while on a cross-country trip with her fiancé. Gabby Petito and her boyfriend Brian Laundrie documented this trip on Instagram and YouTube. But then suddenly Gabby goes quiet. She's not posting on social media. She hasn't FaceTimed with her mom for a few days. I think she went over a week. And all of a sudden, everything just stops. But then, her fiancé shows back up at his home in Florida without Gabby. When her parents can't get a hold of her, they file a missing persons report, and the police show up at Brian's parents' home in Florida, where he and Gabby have been living. But Gabby is nowhere to be found. Brian lawyers up. He is refusing to speak to police, and in the meantime, no one knows where Gabby is. Now, as I am sitting down to record this, there has just been a breaking update, and we will get to that. But I do want to start at the beginning. And a quick disclaimer here, I typically don't cover cases like this that are ongoing. The information changes so quickly. I've done several videos on Chad Daybell and Lori Fallow, and I reported on the Breonna Taylor case a few weeks after it happened, before anyone was talking about it. People will inevitably watch those videos like 6 months later and then comment how the information I am giving is not correct. So just know, because this is an ongoing case, I am giving you the most current information that is being reported as of right now. Okay, let's get into it. Gabrielle Petito, who goes by Gabby, was born on March 19th, 1999, in Blue Point, New York. She was raised in the same area with her younger brother, TJ, and her parents ended up separating, and her mom got remarried, but her parents' names are Nicole Schmidt and Joseph Petito. Abby went to high school in Blue Point and graduated in 2017 from Blue Point High School. She is described as a free spirit. She is always up for an adventure, and she loves traveling. In 2018, Gabby reconnects with an old friend of hers named Brian Laundrie. They are hanging out, and over the next year, they get really close, and the relationship goes from a close friendship to a romantic relationship. The two of them had a lot in common. Brian is also always up for an adventure. He loves nature, so they would go on all of these adventures together, and they just grew extremely close. The couple did a lot of camping. They would go on hikes. They would hang out in nature in hammocks. And I am showing you clips from their Instagram accounts pictures of them, Instagram stories as we go throughout this video, so you can kind of get a sense of who they are. Now, I don't actually have a ton of information about Brian. We know he and his family lived in Florida, and Gabby would end up moving to North Point, Florida to live with Brian and his parents. Gabby really didn't have people in Florida. She moved there for Brian. She has no family or friends, but her father did end up moving from Long Island to Vero Beach, Florida, so that he could live closer to his daughter. Gabby and Brian took a road trip in Gabby's car at one point in their relationship, but I guess living out of a car proved to be incredibly inconvenient. While this didn't make them want to stop traveling, they realized they would never do a road trip in a car like that again. So, they're living together. They are traveling as much as possible. At one point, they ended up going on this trip to Georgia, and they visited the Deep South Farm, which is this gorgeous wedding venue. And it was during this trip that Brian would propose to Gabby, and she would happily accept. The next day, on July 3rd, 2020, Brian would post on Instagram this picture with the caption, quote, "My biggest fear is that one day I will wake up and it will have all been a dream, because that is what every second has felt like since the moment we found each other. Till death do us part, or until I wake up. I'm so happy the answer was yes. Love you, honey." End quote. So, they're just young. They are in love. They really want to do as much traveling and exploring as they can while they are young and don't have a ton of commitments. So they decide to buy a van and embark in this cross-country road trip from Florida. And they're planning on kind of weaving in and out of different states. And they'll end their travels in Portland, Oregon. Both Brian and Gabby worked together at this grocery store, so they saved up money. They were living with his parents, so they were saving up as much as they could. They were planning on posting about their road trip on their Instagram, as well as their YouTube channel called Nomadic Static. And Gabby was really hoping to kind of break into the influencer world. These Instagram posts would be a way for the couple to document their trip, but they would soon become evidence to later help investigators put together a timeline of where the couple had traveled and when. So, anyway, they start out on this adventure. They're posting on Instagram. These posts become incredibly important later in the case. They were planning on ending their trip on Halloween. I guess they had a friend who lived in Portland, so the plan was to end in Portland around Halloween and celebrate Halloween in Portland. On June 17th, 2021, Gabby goes to New York for TJ's high school graduation, and she ends up staying in New York for a few weeks. Then, the couple packs up everything and they get ready for their big trip. Monument Rocks, and here are some pictures from that stop. Gabby captioned them, quote, "There is no place like the tiny place we built, #vanlife." They continue their trip, stopping in Colorado Springs, the Great Sand Dunes National Park in southern Colorado. And then after Colorado, they headed to Utah, where they visited Zion National Park. On July 16th, Gabby posts this picture of their tent in Zion's. On July 21st, the couple has made it to Bryce National Park. Then they make their way to Mystic Hot Springs, which is also in Utah. And here are some pictures from that destination. On July 30th, Gabby posts this picture in the Canyonlands National Park, which is still in Utah. They then make their way to the Arches National Park, and I guess because I live in Utah, this case it's like really home for me. They're going to all these places that I've been to several times, and I don't know, it makes me feel like a weird connection to this case. Anyway, so they're at the Arches. On August 12th, they post that they're at the Arches. And I'm just going off their Instagram for dates here, so I am kind of assuming they're posting around the same time they are in these areas. On August 19th, Gabby posts a picture from outside. So it's like a picture of outside, but it's taken from inside the van. And this is the van they've been living in. Now this would be one of her last Instagram posts, but it is actually believed to be probably the last picture she posted herself. There are a lot of people, and Gabby's family is included in that, who believe the final Instagram post posted to her account on August 25th may have actually been posted by Brian and not Gabby. And possibly even the second to last post, this one of her just kind of showing outside of their van. The reason the last two posts are now being analyzed is because throughout the entire trip, Gabby has tagged a location for all of the places they have stopped in. But these last two don't have a tag, so we don't know where they were taken. I actually do know, like personally, where the last one was taken, just because I'm from Utah, but we'll get into that in a minute. So, on this day, Gabby releases her first and only YouTube video, and I'm going to show a part of that here so you guys can see that, and I will link their channel down below. So, that's Gabby's Instagram. As for Brian, he stops posting after the Arches National Park. So we have pictures of him posted on August 13th at Arches, and then he completely stops posting. Now, it really isn't hard to come to the conclusion that something happened sometime around August 13th when these posts stop. Now, up to this point, they're posting every few days, not like every day. But we know they're likely staying in a lot of places where there isn't cell service. But they are consistently posting every few days. Brian completely stops posting at Arches on August 13th. And Gabby had two more like scenic posts before she goes silent, but they were very sporadic. Obviously, something happened, and we actually know that something did happen is there are police reports and body cam footage from this domestic incident that happened when the couple was still in southern Utah on August 12th. So, the day before Gabby and Brian are posting about the arches, the Moab Police Department was alerted to a possible domestic incident. Gabby and Brian had been arguing in a parking lot of the Moonflower Co-op, and I guess there was some physical altercation, and the police were called. By the time the police arrived, Gabby and Brian had left, but they were able to catch up with them. When the police officer pulls up behind the van and puts his lights on, the van is going 45 miles per hour in a 15, driving erratically, crossing double yellow lines, and then the van pulls off to the right side and hits the curb really hard before slowing down and eventually coming to a stop. The officer who had been following him reported to dispatch that he believed the driver was intoxicated. So this officer approaches the Ryan who is driving, is asked to take the keys out of the ignition and put them on the dashboard. Gabby is sobbing and apologizing to the officer. Now, I watched this entire video of the body cam footage from this incident, and I will link it below, but I'm just gonna try to explain kind of what happened during this, or what we can kind of see from the footage. So, the officer asks them what's going on, and Gabby explains that they've been fighting all morning, and it had just been a bad morning. The officer then asks Gabby to get out of the car and instructs Brian to stay in the car. He takes Gabby away from the van and asks Gabby what is going on. Now she is pretty hysterical, and she's talking about how she just has really bad OCD, and sometimes she's really mean, and she was working on her computer all morning. I guess she was trying to build a blog, and she tells the officer that Brian doesn't believe she can do any of it, and she's crying so hard, you know, when you're crying and you can't catch your breath. I mean, she's obviously very upset. So, she says that Brian wouldn't let her in the van. He told her she needed to calm down, and while she's telling the story, she's very upset. So the officer is like, look, you're not in any trouble right now, but I'm gonna have you sit in the back of the car, and I'm gonna go talk to Brian. You sit here in the air conditioning and calm down for a minute. So then he walks over to Brian, and Brian tells the officer that Gabby got upset with him because his shoes were dirty, and he had moved some of the food around in the back of the van, and she got upset. And at this point, the officer stops him and asks him about the scratches all over his face. And he explains that Gabby kind of got upset and attacked him. He was trying to disengage with her. He took the keys to the van and said, look, I'm gonna go walk it this way, you go this other way, we need a break from each other. And he had the keys to the van, and she was trying to get them. So she kind of attacks him, trying to get these keys. He has several scratches to his face and his arms. So he is explaining to the officer he wasn't necessarily shoving her, but he was trying to keep her away from him, kind of like a self-defense. He does say that he was holding his hands out to keep her away, and you can also tell that he is super upset and nervous. In fact, at one point the officers he's been drinking or if he's on any drugs. And he's like, no, but my adrenaline is just super high right now because of this situation. Gabby admits to another officer that she did hit Brian several times because she wanted to get in the van and she was trying to take the keys away from him. She says at one point Brian grabbed her face, but when police ask, she reiterates he did not hit her, like he never hit her. So she's taking the blame here. She is saying she was upset, she was hitting Brian, and that was what caused him to hit the curb. She explains that she suffers from anxiety, depression, and OCD. And the officer asks her how Brian handles it when she becomes this upset. And she says, he's usually pretty patient, but sometimes he gets frustrated. At one point, one of the officers tells Gabby that, he and his ex kind of had a relationship like this where they would kind of feed off of each other, and it was very unhealthy. He's like, look, I am not telling you what to do, but look at this situation. Look at how far this has escalated. So, the body cam footage that has been released is from one of the officers on scene, but there are several officers on scene by this point. They are pulled off to the side of the road and they're kind of going back and forth between Gabby and Brian, trying to get the whole story. Although, it does seem like they're both telling the exact same story. Gabby got upset. Brian tried to disengage. She really wasn't having that and kind of attacked him. And she was hitting him and punching him as they were driving down the road. Now, there was one discrepancy in the story. When asked why Brian swerved and hit the curb, he says Gabby grabbed the wheel and jerked it. And Gabby said she didn't touch the wheel, but she was punching him. So, two officers are talking about this in this footage, about this discrepancy. And the one who I kind of get the feeling is the senior officer explains how both of these stories make sense. Like, if you think about it, if he was driving down the road and he was holding the steering wheel with his right arm and she's repeatedly hitting that arm, it would be jerking his arm. Now, I will say that Gabby is apologizing. She's still hysterical. She's taking the blame. But Brian's also apologizing for his part in this. But unfortunately, the officers can't just let them go. So, there's another officer back at the parking lot where the original witness who had called police is. And they're interviewing this witness to see what he saw and if his story is lining up with Gabby and Brian's story. But this person totally confirms their story. He never saw the male hit the female. He saw the male trying to lock her out of the van. The witness said she clawed her way into the van through the driver's side door and up and over Brian. So this would kind of explain some of those scratches on his arms. The witness saw Brian set her backpack outside the van, hang it on the back, probably trying to be like, look, here's your stuff, go cool off, which is what he's saying he did. So all three of them are telling the same story. So the problem here now is that the police have to separate them. But they really can't because they're living together in a van. Neither one of them have any friends or family in the aggressor. So they explain this all to Brian, and he's asking, like, if he can be the one to go to jail. He doesn't want Gabby to go to jail. And they're explaining that they have to separate them, and he's like, well, can I go to jail for the night and not her? But the police are like, no, we have no charges against you. It's not a hotel. So they're asking him if there's somewhere that one of them can go for the night. They do have to charge Gabby, and they do have to separate them, but they don't have to arrest Gabby. So if one of them can go to like a hotel or something for the night, that would be the best case scenario. And police are planning on ordering a no contact order. So they tell him if tomorrow he wants to, he can go sign this paper at the police station. It's like a waiver, and the no contact order will be dismissed, but until then, they cannot be in contact with each other. So this goes on for a while, and the police officers are talking back and forth, and they begin to wonder if this is more of a mental health break than a domestic violence incident. So they go and they talk to Gabby one more time, and she is in the back of the police car. She's on the phone with one of her family members, and the officer says, look, I need to ask you a question, and it is very important, and how you answer this question will determine what happens next. And then he says, quote, when you slapped him, were you attempting to cause him physical pain or physical impairment? Is that what you were attempting to do? End quote. And she says, no. So the officers go away from both Brian and Gabby, and they're trying to figure out what to do, how to move forward in the case. And they decide to let them go and classify this as a mental health situation and not a domestic situation. So Brian ends up going to a hotel for the night. Gabby stayed in the van, and this is kind of all we know about this incident. It all went down on August 12th, about 1 week before Gabby goes missing. Then on the 13th, they're both posting pictures from the Arches National Park. Okay, now let's talk about the days leading up to Gabby going silent. On August 21st, Gabby talks to her dad and tells him that they're in Salt Lake, and Gabby's dad ends up ordering food for them through Uber Eats, so he buys them dinner, which is how we know for sure they're in Salt Lake. Now, like I said earlier, Gabby is in pretty constant communication with both of her parents throughout this trip. She would go a few days without calling if they were like camping somewhere and there wasn't service, but never more than a few days. So they're in Salt Lake, and there was this big power outage, and they couldn't connect to Wi-Fi. So Gabby's telling her dad this, and he decides to order them some food, like to have dinner delivered. This would be the last time Joe would ever speak to his daughter. Gabby's mom, Nicole, said after they left Salt Lake, they then went to the Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, and they were in that area on August 24th. We know Gabby was okay on August 24th because she actually FaceTimed with her mom on this date, so her mom is seeing her face. She's okay. her say that she felt like Gabby and Brian were going through a rough patch, but things seemed fine. Now she is aware of the whole mental health, domestic situation that had gone down, so she knows that things are tough for them, but they seemed fine at the time. And, I kind of get this. It's been just the two of them, day in and day out. I get how there could be some, like they're getting on each other's nerves. According to Gabby's mom, the couple was on their way up to Yellowstone, and Gabby is kind of sporadically texting her mom, but she never calls her again. On August 25th, the last Instagram post from Gabby's account would be posted, and it's a picture of Gabby in Ogden, Utah, in front of the monarch butterfly wall. She's holding this little pumpkin, and the post says, "Happy Halloween," which is weird because it is August 25th. And again, there is no location tagged. I just know this is Ogden because I've been there. I've taken pictures in front of this wall before. I know it's in downtown Ogden. So, while a lot of people are really puzzled by the Halloween post, I kind of have a theory on it. So, if you look at Gabby's Instagram feed, it's pretty aesthetically pleasing. And this is just my theory, but I think what happened here was they find this butterfly wall, and it's black and white and orange, and Gabby's thinking this would be a great backdrop for a Halloween photo. So I think she took this photo fully planning on posting it in October on Halloween. I think it was taken for that purpose, and I think later Brian is trying to keep up this facade that Gabby's alive and posting, but he has no new pictures of her, so he posts this picture just to have something to post. So, anyway, we don't know for sure if they made it to Tetons. We don't know if they made it to Yellowstone. After this post, neither Brian nor Abby ever posts again. Now, there was recently a video on TikTok that has blown up, and it may give us some insight into what happened. And I'm saying may because some of the parts of this story doesn't add up. So according to this TikToker, she and her boyfriend picked up Brian, who was hitchhiking on August 29th in Grand Teton. She explains that they picked him up at 5:54 p.m. and would drop him off a few minutes later. He was alone, there was no van, and he told them that he wanted to go to Jackson, and they were going to Jackson, and he offered them $200 to take him up there. So as they're driving, he's explaining that he had been hiking along the Snake River for a few days, and he had left his fiancée back at their campsite, and now he's going to meet back up with her. He had a backpack and a hat on. He was very clean. He didn't look like he had been hiking for several days. She said the only dirty thing about him was his shoes were dirty. She said he was very nice. And they were talking, but then she mentioned Jackson Hole, and suddenly he got really agitated and asked them to drop him off. And she was confused because the plan had always been to go to Jackson Hole. But he gets upset and says he wants to get out. So they drop him off at 6:09 p.m. So less than 15 minutes after they picked him up. And this is kind of where their encounter with Brian ends. The thing that does doesn't make sense? Well, there are a couple of things. Mostly the fact that at this point, he does not have the van. But 2 days later, he shows up in Florida with the van. Also, when the couple had this encounter with the police in Moab, they hadn't really had enough money for a hotel. But according to this TikToker, Brian offers them $200 to give him a ride to Jackson Hole. So I'm not sure, some of those things don't add up, but police have been in contact with this woman and they have said, quote, "We are potentially utilizing her information into our timeline," end quote. According to Nicole, Gabby's mom, the last time she got a text from Gabby was on August 30th. But looking back, she doesn't know if this text was from Gabby or if it was Brian texting from Gabby's phone. The text said, quote, "No service in Yosemite," end quote. Now, we know the couple is heading north to Yellowstone, so it's strange to look at the timeline and then see that suddenly they're down in California. They haven't done any posts about Tetons or Yellowstone. They haven't reached out or spoken to their families, so this is a bit of a red flag. The first days that Gabby was kind of silent, her mom thought she was just camping somewhere with no cell service. But after 9 days without hearing from Gabby, her family became very concerned, so they reached out to the police. On September 11th, so like a week ago, a little over a week ago, the police agreed to file a missing persons case. Gabby was last seen on August 24th, where she left a hotel that they were staying at in Salt Lake City. So the couple is seen leaving the hotel, and the next thing we know, Brian returns to Florida in their van without Gabby, sometime between August 30th and September 10th. Brian just shows back up at his house, and remember, he lives with his parents. They both do. He returns, but he never contacts Gabby's family to say anything, and they're supposed to still be traveling until Halloween, so he's home weeks early, and he's just back in Florida. Gabby's parents, in the meantime, are freaking out. They can't get a hold of Gabby, and they're trying to get a hold of Brian to find out where they are, not knowing they're no longer together. Gabby's father becomes so concerned that he makes the 3-hour drive from his home to Brian's parents' home on September 10th. And we don't really know what happened here. We don't know what was said. But what we do know is that the police were called out at this point. It seems like Brian just isn't saying anything. So back in New York, where Gabby has been reported missing, the police there end up calling Florida, and they ask them if they'll go do like a welfare check at the Laundrie home, a welfare check on Gabby. So police go back to the home. They knock on the door. They speak to Brian's parents. They inform police that Brian has been home for a week. He drove Gabby's van back by himself and arrived on September 1st, 2021. It is at this point where Gabby's mom realizes that that last text from Gabby saying there's no service in Yosemite on August 30th could not have been from Gabby. Yes, it came from her phone, but here's the Yosemite in California on August 30th. And even if 1 second after they sent that text, they turned around and started heading back to Florida, they would have never been able to drive from the West Coast to the East Coast in one day, and Brian's family is saying he returned home on September 1st. So, the police are at the Laundrie home finding this information out. Now, the Laundrie family is not concerned about Gabby. They offer no explanation about Gabby's whereabouts. Instead, police were told that Brian has retained a lawyer, and basically that he wouldn't be speaking to anyone about Gabby. A friend of Gabby's named Rose would come forward and tell the Daily Mail, quote, "He's got these jealousy issues, and he struggles with what Gabby would call these episodes, where he would hear things and hear voices and he wouldn't sleep. Gabby had to stay at my house a bunch of times because she needed a breather and didn't want to go home. When I saw that Brian was back from the trip, that was the first thing that popped into my mind, that Brian had had one of his episodes, and I was just hoping he didn't have a snapping moment." Now, of course, there is a lot we don't know. This is an ongoing investigation, and I'm sure police are tracking cell phone data from Gabby and Brian's phones as they try to put together a timeline. I know a lot of people on TikTok and Instagram are going crazy about this case and begging for anyone with information to come forward. But here's the thing, and this is just my opinion, but they're camping in remote areas. If something happened to Gabby, it's possible the only other person with information is Brian, and as of right now, he isn't talking. In fact, as of right now, Brian is also missing. According to the Laundrie family, Brian has been missing since last Tuesday, and his family didn't report it until Friday. Gabby's family has been quick to point out that Brian is not missing, Gabby is missing. Brian is hiding. As of right now, there is a search underway in the Carlston Reserves in Sarasota County, Florida for Brian. I guess he told his parents he was going there. There's like thousands of acres. And he never returned. They went there the next day and his car was there, and there was actually a note from a police officer that said, "Hey, you can't park here overnight. You need to move your car or it's gonna get towed." His parents left his car there thinking he's gonna come back and he'll need a way to get home. But then he never came home, so the next day they go back to the reserves and they get his car and take it home. He is missing, but I don't like to use that word because I do think he is hiding. And so there is this massive search underway for him. At the same time, the FBI is searching Grand Teton National Park for Gabby. Gabby's van has also been impounded by police who have searched it, and they said they found, quote, material inside the van, although we really have no idea what that means. Gabby has been missing for 3 weeks. The area they are searching in Wyoming for Gabby has had temperatures dipping below freezing at night. Fox News confirmed that Teton County Coroner Brent Blue arrived at the Bridger Teton National Forest because a body had been found in the investigation has not been completed to confirm 100% that we found Gabby, but her family has been notified of this discovery, and we are sending our condolences to the family. And then he goes on to say a cause of death has not been determined. Within a few minutes of this FBI kind of press release on Gabby, her father posted a picture of Gabby. It is this picture of Gabby with some little wings, which now, look like angel wings. And this is basically a touching tribute to his daughter. So while the FBI has not come out and confirmed it is Gabby, it does seem that it is Gabby. Her father wrote, quote, "She touched the world," and then this photo of her posing with these angel wings. So the human remains are consistent with Gabby, and I assume that probably tomorrow morning, I am filming this late Sunday night, we will have a positive identification. Now Brian is still missing, and I kind of think he will not be found alive. My guess is this will be a situation where he chooses to end his life. I hope that is not the case. I hope there is justice for Gabby. Here is my question for you guys. Do you think it is possible for a person to just snap and kill someone they love? Do you think that, like, any normal person could be pushed to that? I want to know what you think about that. Also, I'm curious if you guys agree with me and you think Brian will not be found alive. Or do you think he will be found? Because now the hunt is really on for Brian. Gabby's body has been found, and he's super suspicious. There's no way he is not involved in this. So, let me know what you guys think. I will keep you updated. Thanks for joining me.